The day my eldest son looked me in the eye and said, "You've had your time, Dad," I didn't hear words. I heard a challenge. He thought power was something you could steal, not something you earn in blood and sacrifice. So I stepped back. I let him take my chair, my company, my name. I let him think he'd won. What he didn't know was that every contract, every deal, every wall around him was built by me, and I knew exactly how to make it all collapse, right on top of him, like subscribe and share, and tell me, where are you watching from? I still remember the day the air in my own house turned cold. The morning light came through the glass walls of my office, catching the edges of the framed photographs, 30 years of work, sweat, and family. My eldest son walked in like he already owned the place. His tie wasn't straight, his smile was. He looked at me the way young men look at old kings before they pull the crown. "Dad," he said, standing in front of my desk. "You've had your time." The words landed harder than any blow. Not because they surprised me, but because I had heard them long before he spoke them, heard them in the small, defiant pauses during family dinners, in the way he corrected me in front of employees, in the silence when I told him patience builds empires. I leaned back, steepled my fingers, and studied him. Behind him, the skyline of Chicago burned orange with dawn, a city that had watched me build a company from a single warehouse to a glass tower. He didn't look at it. He looked only at me. "So that's how this conversation begins," I said. He smirked. "It's how it ends, too. The board's ready for change. We need new blood." I watched his confidence like a candle too close to the wind, bright, trembling, sure it would last forever. "New blood?" I asked. "Whose blood built this company, son?" He didn't answer. He had already turned his back to the photographs. I let the silence stretch until he shifted. Silence makes people nervous. It makes them confess. But he didn't. He mistook it for weakness. "You'll see," he said, hand already on the door. "It's time," he left. He didn't notice the faint smile that followed him out. That evening, the house felt different. My wife tried to make conversation at dinner, but the clinking of silverware was louder than her voice. My daughter, always perceptive, glanced between us, her fork untouched. "Dad?" she asked softly. "What happened at the office?" "Just business," I told her, but the truth was heavier. It wasn't business. It was blood turning on blood. After they went to bed, I poured a bourbon and walked through the study, the room that had once been a nursery. I stopped at the old family portrait, my wife, my daughter, my son, and me, all frozen in a frame of happier lies. His smile was still wide, genuine, innocent. Somewhere between that photograph and today, greed had eaten through the heart I thought I knew. I traced my finger across the frame, then down to the keyhole of the safe hidden behind it. Inside were the documents that made the company what it was: trust deeds, patents, accounts, all the threads of power woven into one man's legacy. Mine. I unlocked it and pulled out a thin envelope. On the front, in my handwriting, were the words, "For when the time comes." It was a contingency plan I'd written 10 years ago, in case I ever had to protect the empire from outsiders. I'd never imagined I'd use it against my own son, but legacy isn't inherited. It's defended. The next morning, I met my old partner, Lewis, at the country club. We'd built the company together before he retired, but he still kept his ear close to the boardroom doors. "He's talking to the investors," Lewis said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were copies of emails, my son's signature on plans for restructuring, rumors of a new CEO transition. "How long do I have?" I asked. "Board meets next week. He wants to announce before the quarter ends." I nodded. "Then we let him." Lewis frowned. "Let him?" "Every empire needs its fall," I said. "He just volunteered to build his." He chuckled nervously. "You're not going to—" "Nothing illegal," I cut in. "Just instructive." That night, I walked into my son's office without knocking. He was on a call, talking numbers that didn't make sense to anyone who'd actually earned them. He ended the call mid-sentence when he saw me. "Dad, you can't just barge in." "I built this place," I said, stepping closer. "I'll walk through any door I choose." He straightened his jacket. "You're making this personal." "It is personal," I told him. "You're my son. Everything I have, everything you have, exists because I spent half my life sacrificing sleep and blood to keep this family standing. And you think you can replace that with ambition. He met my eyes, and for the first time I saw not arrogance but conviction. I can make it bigger, he said quietly. Faster, you play it safe. I want to win. I almost admired him in that moment. Almost. Be careful what you call winning, I said. Some trophies come with chains. He didn't flinch. You won't stop me. No, I said, turning to leave. I'll teach you. As I walked down the hall, employees lowered their eyes, unsure which of us to greet first. Power shifts make people cautious. I didn't blame them. I just smiled, because I already knew the rules of the game my son was about to play. I'd written them. He thought I was fading. He thought time had taken me. He forgot time also refines steel. If you've ever watched someone you love become your rival, you understand the silence before the storm, the moment you decide not to shout, but to listen. Because in that silence, plans are born. I looked back through the glass wall at my son pacing inside his office, phone pressed to his ear, already plotting his first move. I almost felt proud, almost. Then I reached into my pocket, felt the weight of the gold watch my father had given me when I started the company, and whispered to myself, game on. If you've ever faced betrayal from your own blood, tell me what you'd have done differently. Would you fight fire with fire, or let them burn themselves first? Like, share, and subscribe if you've ever believed revenge isn't anger, it's patience with purpose. The following week, he took the chair. I watched from the edge of the boardroom as my eldest son slid into the seat that had once been mine. The room applauded, polite, uncertain. He thanked them with the smile of a man who had just stolen something priceless and believed the world would never notice. Behind that smile I saw hunger. Behind mine, calculation. He started his reign the way young rulers do, with noise, new logos, new slogans, new staff who spoke fast and promised faster returns. He pushed the old guard out with charming handshakes and rehearsed empathy. I didn't stop him. I only asked for updates. He sent none. At home, his mother tried to smooth the fracture. He needs to find his own way, she said one night. I looked at her across the dinner table and answered, he already did. Straight into a storm. By the second month, he had turned the company into a carnival of ambition. Lavish product launches, rooftop parties, journalists eating out of his hand. The press called him the new face of the brand. I called him temporary. Every document he signed, every investor he charmed, ran through the same system I built. Every keystroke logged, every agreement mirrored to my private server. I let him build his empire on foundations I could tilt with a single command. The daughter, Claire, began visiting me at the house more often. He's changing, she said. People are scared of him. Good, I replied. Fear is an honest currency. Let's see how he spends it. She didn't understand yet. She still thought I was retreating. That was fine. Even the best moves looked like surrender at first. 3 months in, the first crack appeared. A supplier defaulted on a contract he'd bragged about signing personally. He blamed the finance team, the board whispered. He fired the CFO to look decisive, without realizing the CFO was the one I'd recommended years ago, the one who still owed me loyalty. I didn't have to lift a finger. The man walked out with a briefcase full of duplicates, emails, ledgers, time-stamped signatures, quiet proof that my son was losing control. I poured myself a drink that night and listened to the ice crack in the glass. He thinks he's wearing a crown, I said aloud. He doesn't know it's wired for lightning. He called me the next morning, voice carefully neutral. Dad, I need advice. The press is running with this supplier story. Advice? I asked. Or approval? He hesitated. You always told me to stay ahead of perception. I did, I said. But perception isn't the enemy, son. It's the mirror. You should look into it more often. That silence told me he finally realized what was happening. Too late to stop it. Not early enough to escape it. The following weekend I invited him for dinner, something we hadn't done alone in months. I grilled steaks the way he liked them when he was a kid. He arrived late, phone glued to his ear, pretending not to be shaken. The arrogance was still there, but thinner now, stretched tight across fear. You're quiet, I said as he sat. Just tired, he answered. Running a company isn't exactly a vacation. Then stop treating it like one, I replied. He looked up sharply. I know what I'm doing. I'm sure you do, I said, slicing my steak. Every king says that before the revolt. He pushed back his chair. I didn't come here for riddles. No, I said softly. You came here for help. You just don't know how to ask yet. He left without finishing his food. I let him go. I'd already planted the seed. That night I reviewed the internal audit reports waiting on my desk. The figures told a story he hadn't read. Cost overruns, unpaid vendors, quietly nervous investors. The empire was tilting, and only I knew where the pressure points were. I wrote a note in the margin. Phase 2. Let gravity work. The numbers told the truth before anyone else dared to. My son's empire was listing to one side, but no one wanted to be the first to shout fire in the theater. I didn't rush. I watched. Every morning I sat in my study with a mug of black coffee and 3 screens open. The market feed, the internal audit logs, and the live camera in the boardroom I'd quietly left running after I retired. He never thought to change the access codes. Arrogance makes people sloppy. From my chair, miles away, I saw him rehearsing dominance. The way he gestured when he spoke. The forced laughter that used to come naturally. He thought he was steering the ship, but all I could see were leaks forming beneath the surface. I started keeping a journal again, not for nostalgia, but for precision. Every date, every phone call, every decision he made that would later hang him with his own rope. Patience wasn't weakness. It was documentation. At home, the silence grew heavier. My wife tried to keep the peace, pretending the storm outside didn't reach our kitchen. Claire, ever the observer, noticed everything. You're watching him fall, she said one night. Why don't you stop him? I looked at her and answered the way my father once answered me. Some lessons only pain can teach. She didn't like that. No one ever does until they see the result. 3 weeks later, the board called an emergency meeting. A rumor had started. Someone inside the finance department had leaked projections showing the company bleeding cash. The press smelled blood. I arrived at the building uninvited, walking through the lobby as though I still owned it. The receptionist froze. Old habits die hard. Inside the elevator, I caught my reflection. Older, yes, but sharper now, like a blade that had seen enough grinding to know its purpose. When the doors opened, I didn't enter the boardroom. I stood outside listening. Through the glass wall, I saw my son pacing, hands flying as he explained away disaster. The directors nodded politely, the way people nod before they mutiny. I memorized every word. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. After the meeting, he cornered me in the hallway. You shouldn't be here, he hissed. Neither should half of your numbers, I said. You built castles on paper. He clenched his jaw. You think I don't know how to fix this? I know you don't, I replied, stepping close enough for him to see that I wasn't angry. Anger wastes precision, but I'll give you the space to prove me wrong. He turned away, muttering something about old men and their paranoia. I let him walk. The best traps close themselves. That night I called Lewis. He's wobbling, I said. Lewis chuckled. Ready to pull the trigger? Not yet. The noise hasn't peaked. People listen best after the loudest crash. We set a plan in motion, a quiet audit disguised as routine compliance. Within 2 weeks, I would have the proof of his mismanagement printed, notarized, and waiting in my safe. Not to destroy him, yet, but to remind him who still held the blueprint. 2 nights later, the rain started. It wasn't dramatic, just a steady tap against the office windows, but it made the city look honest again, washed of its polish. I sat there past midnight, the glow of the monitors reflecting off the bourbon in my glass, scrolling through the audit results that had just come in. Every figure confirmed what I already knew. Hidden transfers. Inflated invoices, entire departments operating on bravado instead of balance. My son had built an empire of noise. I sent the files to a private drive, labeled them with one word, proof. When I finally closed the laptop, the house was quiet. My wife's side of the bed was cold. She had long since stopped waiting for me. I stared at the ceiling and thought of my own father, how he taught me that every empire, if left unchecked, devours its own king. The next morning, Claire came by with coffee. She looked exhausted but determined. You can't just sit here and watch, she said. I'm not watching, I replied. I'm recording, she shook her head. He's still your son. Exactly why I won't save him yet. Her eyes searched mine, and for a second I saw fear there, not of him, but of me. Maybe she saw how calm I'd become. Real revenge isn't loud. It's surgical. I handed her a folder. Keep this. If he tries to drag you or your mother into the mess, you'll know what to show. She didn't ask what was inside. Smart girl. By the end of the week, rumors of layoffs hit the company Slack channels. He blamed economic shifts. I blamed his ego. Reporters started calling, sensing weakness. One asked me for a quote. I said, every family has seasons. Some teach growth, some teach pruning. They didn't understand it, but he did. That was enough. When I arrived home that night, my wife was waiting by the fireplace. Do you want to destroy him? She asked quietly. No, I said. I want him to understand what he destroyed. She turned away. He won't forgive you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm restoring order. She didn't argue again. Saturday morning, I drove to the industrial park where it had all begun. The first warehouse, the original sign still hanging crooked and sun-faded. I stood there in the cold wind, remembering the day I'd bought it, the nights I'd slept on the floor when payroll was late. It reminded me why this fight mattered. Legacy wasn't about power. It was about sacrifice. When I returned to the city, I stopped by the office one last time before the storm truly broke. The receptionist looked up, startled, and whispered, "Good morning, Mr. Rain." She caught herself. I mean, Mr. Rain Sr. Still sounds right, I said, and kept walking. Through the glass wall, I saw my son shouting into his phone, face flushed, papers scattered like snow. Behind him, 2 directors were already drafting their exit letters. The empire was tilting faster than even I'd planned. I didn't knock. I simply turned and left the building, letting the security camera record me walking away. He'd watch that footage later, searching for meaning, and he'd find none, because the real move was already done. The auditors had filed the report. The board would see it Monday. The quiet part of the war was over. If you've ever had to let silence do the work for you, you know the strange satisfaction that comes with it. You don't gloat. You don't announce. You simply wait for truth to finish what you started. Monday arrived with the sound of rain on glass, soft, relentless, and prophetic. I drove downtown early, not to interfere, but to witness the moment gravity finally did its work. By 9 a.m., the boardroom lights were on, and the directors sat in careful rows. My son walked in wearing a confidence 2 sizes too large. He had traded humility for headline suits and a smile rehearsed in mirrors. When he saw me in the corner, he paused just long enough for the cameras to catch it. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. "I built this place to last," I replied. "I like to watch it stand," he smirked, thinking the statement flattery. Then the auditors entered, 3 people in gray, carrying tablets and sealed folders. Silence spread like a rumor. They began their presentation with numbers, charts, and polite vocabulary that always precedes a guillotine. Each slide cut a little deeper. Unreported losses, broken compliance chains, unauthorized transfers. The words gross negligence appeared on screen like a verdict. My son's expression froze. He looked around the table for allies. Most looked down. The chairman cleared his throat and asked for a recess. My son stormed out before they granted it. I followed at a distance. In the hallway, he rounded on me. "You planned this." I kept my voice even. "You executed it. You think you can take it back?" "I don't need to take anything back," I said. "You're handing it over yourself." He left the building an hour later, surrounded by silence and cameras that loved the scent of scandal. By evening, the headlines read, "Rain Industries faces internal crisis." The markets responded accordingly. So did the family. At dinner, my wife refused to speak. Claire stared at her plate until she finally whispered, "Is this the lesson, Dad?" "No," I said. "This is the warning." The fracture had widened, no longer just between father and son, but through the entire house. That night, I sat in the dark of my study, scrolling through the live news feed, watching commentators dissect numbers they didn't understand. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt the quiet weight of victory's price. Revenge, when done correctly, never feels like celebration. It feels like confirmation. Still, I wasn't done. The collapse had to be complete before the rebuilding could begin. My next call was to Lewis. Phase 3, I said. He sighed. He's your son. And I'm his father, I answered. Which means it's my duty to finish what he started. When I hung up, I walked to the window. The city glowed beneath the rain, reflecting in the glass like a ghost of everything I'd built. Somewhere out there, my son was realizing the one truth I'd always known. You can inherit a business, but you can't inherit respect. You earn that one deal at a time. I turned off the lights and left the office, my reflection fading into the darkness. By midnight, the company's stock had dropped 12%. The phone rang every few minutes. Reporters, lawyers, board members who suddenly remembered my number. I didn't answer any of them. I simply poured another measure of bourbon and listened to the house settle around me, old beams creaking in sympathy. Through the window, I could see the faint glow of the city skyline, a heartbeat of red lights pulsing against the clouds. Somewhere out there, my son was sitting in a hotel room, drowning in the noise he'd created. I wondered if he'd realized, yet that the silence coming from me was louder than any statement I could make. I turned to the desk and opened the drawer where I kept the gold watch my father had given me. The second hand ticked slow and steady, discipline in metal form. That's what he never understood. Leadership isn't power, it's rhythm. Lose the rhythm, and the empire stumbles. At dawn, Claire called. He's at the house, she said quietly. I was halfway down the stairs before she finished the sentence. He was in the living room, suit wrinkled, eyes red. The man who had strutted through boardrooms now looked like a boy who'd lost his map. For a heartbeat, I almost saw the child I'd taught to ride a bike on the driveway outside. Dad, you have to help me, he said. I poured coffee and said nothing. He dropped into a chair, rubbing his temples. They're turning on me. The investors, the press, everyone. Of course they are, I said. They followed the crown, not the king. And you forgot to earn either. He looked up, voice cracking. You wanted this, didn't you? I wanted you to learn, I replied. I didn't choose the method, you did. He slammed his fist against the table. I can fix it. No, I said evenly. You can't. The words landed like a verdict. Later that day, the board convened again. This time they asked me to attend officially. I entered the room to a hush that felt like history correcting itself. My son sat at the far end, shoulders drawn tight, eyes hollow. The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Rain Sr., given the findings, we would like to request your interim leadership until the investigation is concluded. I nodded once. Under one condition, I said. He stays. Murmurs rippled through the room. My son looked up, confused. He needs to see what consequence looks like, I continued. And he needs to help rebuild what he broke. The motion passed unanimously. The empire was mine again, but not the way it used to be. This time it came with the weight of blood and lesson. That evening, I drove him back to the house. Neither of us spoke during the ride. The only sound was rain on the windshield and the faint tick of the watch in my pocket. When we reached the driveway, he finally whispered, "Why didn't you destroy me completely?" I parked, turned off the engine, and looked straight ahead. Because you're my son, and mercy is a stronger punishment than ruin. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. When I stepped inside, my wife met my eyes across the hall. She didn't ask who had won. She already knew. I poured one last drink, stood before the old family portrait, and felt the storm outside break into clear air. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the first breath after chaos, the moment when fracture becomes foundation again. By the time the press called it a recovery, I knew the hardest part wasn't over. Rebuilding a company is simple. Numbers, plans, signatures. Rebuilding a family? That takes surgery without anesthesia. My son sat across from me in the conference room we now shared again, his posture smaller, his voice careful. The arrogance was gone, replaced by calculation of another kind. Survival. "I want to make this right," he said. "Then start with honesty," I told him. "How deep does it go?" He took a long breath and admitted everything. The offshore accounts, the consultants who promised shortcuts, the board member who whispered that I was holding him back. I didn't interrupt. I just let him empty the poison. When he finished, he looked younger, but smaller too, like a man who'd finally seen the cost of his own ambition. "You don't have to forgive me," he said. "I won't," I answered. "But I might teach you how not to need it." Over the next month, we worked side by side. I gave him the smallest projects, the kind that built character and blisters. He hated it at first, then began to understand. Each signed order, each renegotiated contract was a step back into the world he'd almost lost. The board watched in silence. They saw something shift, the father's steadiness tempering the son's restless energy. What they didn't see was the unspoken rule between us. I led, he learned. And every time he stumbled, I reminded him that power without patience is just noise. At home, my wife started setting the dinner table for 3 again. Claire joined us, still cautious but hopeful. The conversations grew longer, the silences shorter. For the first time in months, the house sounded like a home instead of a museum of grudges. But reconciliation doesn't erase history, it rewrites it. One evening, as the sun bled out behind the skyline, my son approached me in the study. "I found this," he said, holding the envelope I'd labeled, "For when the time comes." He'd opened it. Inside were the documents, the triggers that could have legally ended his career in one motion. He stared at them, then at me. "You could have used these. Why didn't you?" "Because," I said, "sometimes mercy teaches faster than punishment." He nodded slowly, the realization landing heavier than any reprimand. He placed the papers back on my desk and whispered, "Thank you." Weeks later, at the annual shareholder meeting, he stood beside me as I addressed the audience. Cameras flashed. The headlines had changed from scandal to restoration. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't talk about innovation or profit. He talked about humility, responsibility, legacy. It was the first time I'd heard my own words come out of his mouth. Afterward, we walked out together into the crisp winter air. For a moment, standing beneath the glass tower that bore our name, I saw not rivalry but succession, the kind that's earned, not taken. The following weeks became a quiet grind. No headlines, no applause, just long days and late nights sorting through the damage. We rebuilt every contract from the ground up. I sat in meetings again, not as the loudest voice, but as the compass. My son took notes, asked questions, listened. I began to see the man I'd hoped he would become, buried under the wreckage he'd made. One evening, after the staff had gone home, I found him alone in the boardroom, lights dimmed, a single spreadsheet open on the wall. He was recalculating costs line by line, cross-checking invoices. "The same meticulous work I used to do when the company fit inside one warehouse. You're still here," I said. He didn't look up. "Trying to understand how you did this for 30 years. "Not how," I corrected him. "Why?" He sat back, exhausted, and finally met my eyes. "I thought success meant people feared you." "They don't fear leaders," I said. "They trust them. Fear fades. Respect lasts." He nodded slowly. It wasn't apology. It was comprehension. At home, the air was lighter. Claire started humming again when she cooked. My wife stopped avoiding my gaze. One Sunday afternoon, we found ourselves on the porch, the 4 of us, coffee and quiet between us. My son spoke first. "I know I broke something that might never be the same," he said. I let the words hang before answering. "Things rarely go back to what they were, but they can become something better." He looked out across the yard, the same yard where he'd once built forts out of cardboard boxes and declared himself CEO of the backyard. I smiled, remembering. You always wanted the throne, I said. He gave a half laugh. Guess I needed to learn what it weighed. Back at the office, I began transferring small pieces of authority back to him, slowly, deliberately. He didn't notice at first, then one day stopped in my doorway. You're letting go again, he said. Not letting go, I replied. Letting you hold it properly this time. He nodded and walked away. For the first time, his shoulders didn't look burdened by the crown. They looked balanced under it. The reckoning wasn't a single day, it was a season. A stretch of time where every choice either repaired or reopened the wound. We both learned to choose repair. There were still disagreements, still echoes of pride, but they came with restraint now. Respect had replaced defiance. One Friday night, long after the last employee left, he came to my office door. You ever regret teaching me the hard way? He asked. I closed the ledger and leaned back. Every day, I said. But I'd regret it more if I hadn't. He understood. That was enough. The company stabilized. The family did too. It wasn't perfect. Nothing rebuilt from ashes ever is. But it was ours again, and this time built on truth instead of assumption. That weekend, as I locked the office and stepped into the evening air, the city lights caught the reflection of the gold watch on my wrist. The second hand ticked steady. Time hadn't taken me. It had refined me. And maybe, just maybe, it was refining him too. If you've ever had to rebuild something that betrayal once broke, whether a business or a family, tell me what kept you steady. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you've stayed with me through this reckoning, make sure you're subscribed. Spring came late that year, and with it, a strange quiet. The company no longer felt like a battlefield. It sounded like breathing again. Still, one final conversation waited between my son and me, the kind that decides whether peace is genuine or only a truce. We met at the house, in the study where everything had begun. The late afternoon light painted gold across the old family portrait on the wall. I poured 2 coffees, no bourbon this time. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching the yard where he'd once played. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. About respect, about legacy. I nodded. And I want to earn it. I studied him for a long moment. The arrogance was gone. What remained was resolve. Then you understand what that means, I said. It's not about owning my company. It's about deserving our name. Over the following days, I drew up the paperwork that would make our partnership official. Not a gift, not an inheritance, a contract. We would run the business together, each accountable to the other. Every signature a reminder that mercy comes with structure. When I handed him the folder, he hesitated. You trust me again? I smiled. No, I'm teaching you how to be trustworthy. He exhaled, then signed. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight lift. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally finished the lesson. Weeks later, at a small internal meeting, he stood before our employees and spoke without notes. Mistakes are expensive, he said, but lessons are priceless. The room stayed silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause. I didn't join in. I just watched. My job was done. That evening, as we locked up the office, he stopped me at the door. Dad, he said, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but thank you for not walking away. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You were never meant to be destroyed, I told him. You were meant to be rebuilt. He nodded, eyes glassy, and whispered, I'm proud to be your son. That was the moment the storm finally passed. At home, the house felt alive again. My wife laughed easily. Claire teased her brother like old times. The portrait above the fireplace looked different now, not because it had changed, but because we finally had. I realized mercy isn't weakness. It's control handed out in measured doses to those who have earned it. Later that night, I poured one last coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The city skyline glimmered in the distance, and the gold watch ticked steadily on my wrist. For the first time, I didn't see a countdown. I saw continuity. If you've ever had to balance justice with mercy, you know they're the same weight in different hands. Tell me what mercy means to you in the comments below. And if this story reminded you that revenge can lead back to peace, subscribe and stay. More stories begin where this one ends.